Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game Esoteric, and it's time to take one more tour through the video game trap house that is known as Super Sega, because Alejandro has provided more information, and it is just getting absolutely insane. We're to the point now where he says he needs 1,000 pre-order reservations to make the console, or else maybe the entire project will fold up, that he's losing faith in it, maybe it'll have to become software emulation instead. But the Gaudy himself, the Todd Rogers of Spain, is here with a lot more information, and trust me, when you see the clip in this video, you're going to realize that it has gotten even weirder than I could have predicted, because the absolute insanity that is Super Sega just keeps circling the drain, getting stranger and stranger every single day. This man is the Pablo Picasso of just absolutely throwing anything out into the world and hoping something like it sticks. And honestly, we've always known this isn't an FPGA core or an FPGA board, but now we really have a second off-ramp for the Super Sega project. If they can't fund the whole thing, apparently they're just going to move it over to a software emulation box, a Super Sega Mini as it was, and try to sell you that and ship that to backers, because even though he rolls up in the Lamborghini, apparently doesn't have the money to actually make these units, and because apparently, according to him at least, Alejandro, Sega is intervening, he is running out of cash. But honestly, just go ahead and watch this next clip, the most recent information Alejandro's put out into the world, and trust me, what you're about to see is nothing you could ever guess, but damn is it one wild ride indeed.
Mi polla! Nice fucking model!
Yeah, what you just saw is exactly what you think you just saw. Alejandro from Super Sega twerking his own pipe on a cell phone video. And big thanks to Logan McLeod, he's been helping me translate a lot of this over, because this is all in Spanish and I do not read, write, or speak anything of the sort. Honestly, some days I have trouble with English, but this was set into a channel, Spinecar TV, who is a Spanish YouTuber talking about retro gaming, and he's actually been talking to Alejandro up until this point in time, and there is a link to that channel down below as well. But apparently now Alejandro is going to break off all communication with everybody and just keep quiet, and that makes perfect sense. Super Sega was sending me interview requests and emails for the longest time trying to hype up the project, and when I started talking negatively about the project, those emails and requests completely dried up. But basically what is being said now is that they need 1,000 pre-order units in crowdfunding, or else they're not going to be able to afford the Super Sega project. So even though apparently, at least according to Super Sega, Sega themselves are trying to stop this, they're still going forward with the crowdfunding. And my guess would be it's not going to be one of those Kickstarters where if they don't make every single penny, they get nothing. It's going to be one of those, we're trying to raise X, but we get to keep whatever you give us. And honestly, that is the man behind all of it right there. But if this becomes the Super Sega Mini, all it's going to be is an emulation box, and obviously that's all it is right now anyway. We know that there is not FPGA cores for Dreamcast out there, and even though we have cores for every other system on the MiSTer FPGA side of things, this is no different than running any Dreamcast emulator out there, except the performance on their hardware isn't even keeping up to par with what you would expect from a mid-range PC or even an $80 handheld device, because I just reviewed the Anbernic RG Cube XX that costs $80, and that ran Dreamcast at full frame rate, at full resolutions. Sometimes you're even able to get a bump. So if you just wanted to walk over to your PC, load up Redream and play it, that's what the Super Sega guys are talking about now, just reducing this thing down to an emulation box. And obviously they started off by showing videos and photos of the FPGA board that they were using, the AMD Vertex UltraScale Plus, which obviously was a $9,000 evaluation board, and that was the first red flag when they announced this thing, showing off an FPGA chip that was basically non-existent and cost way more than anyone would ever be able to reasonably spend on an FPGA console. Even if the core existed, the chip that they were using was a part that the bill of materials would be absolutely astronomical. We're talking the most expensive console ever made. But we know that was never the plan. We're getting into Raspberry Pi in a box territory here, or more likely some sort of rock chip with an internal GPU, the stuff that you see on a lot of the cheap handheld devices. Those can be had for like $5 or $6 on the open market if you buy enough of them. Or you could just find a pre-made board with HDMI outs and USB ins, maybe even get a DB9 connector in there if you wanted to, and you could ship that thing in a cheap plastic case for absolutely a completely reduced price. You could run away with 80 to 90% of the money everyone's given you and still ship them something, which may be the ultimate plan here. We have one of two options. Either they're going to take the exit ramp and blame Sega and say that they've lost all the money to Sega and that they can't do anything, working, and if that doesn't seem to be working, they can now also say we're going to pivot it to the Super Sega Mini, make this an emulation box, and ship you something, and they could end up doing that for pennies on the dollar of what they made. Because the first time the PCB appeared and every single time since then, pretty much everyone who knows anything about electronics, myself included, has gone through this thing and said there is no way it is running anything. It's missing components, it's missing capacitors, some of the path tracing literally is just a pass-through, and that does make sense. My guess is whatever's underneath that heatsink there could actually be running something, or it could just be an absolute prop, and it could be running some sort of emulation off-screen with some trickery, because again, I talked about video editing. It's something that can easily be done to convince you otherwise. And old Alejandro here, when he's not grabbing his meat like it owes him money, he is trying to convince you of something. And the same thing with Sega Saturn. They showed emulation here. Definitely wasn't an FPGA core, and it definitely had some emulation issues as well. And that's not at all surprising, because Sega Saturn emulation is very difficult. I would say Mendefend gets it the closest, but honestly it really is real Sega Saturn hardware or MiSTer FPGA when it comes to that 100% or close to accuracy. And I just did a recent video on Yaba Sanshiro, and I showed Saturn Bomberman there and said that emulation was not correct for it. So this is a situation where you see issues in the games that Super Sega is showing and exhibiting. You also see similar or like-minded issues in some of the software emulators on the market, because if you've ever tried to emulate Sega Saturn, especially on a cheap device, you will know that it isn't the most performant thing ever. And that is going to be really interesting as a secondary question. If Super Sega FPGA turns into Super Sega Mini and it just is software emulation, what's the quality of the emulators you're going to be getting? My assumption is it's going to be worse than anything else on the market, because Alejandro is not going to deliver a product. This is exactly what happened with the Cinemartin 8K camera as well. They promised the world, and in the end, the one person that actually got a look inside of it saw a sensor strapped to a mini Windows machine, and it was just running a piece of software. And I remember some years ago, all sorts of cinematography websites were talking about the fact that soon you could buy your own sensors on the open market and maybe create your own cinema camera with just some software reducing down the cost. And that's exactly when the Cinemartin 8K appeared. It was just a sensor in a box, but it really does beg the question and really confuses me. Somebody behind the scenes at Super Sega FPGA has some sort of technical talent. Getting a sensor stood up in a box, running it into a PC, and getting an image out the back would probably take me a solid week or two worth of work just to get anything to appear. So what I'm saying is, it seems like Alejandro and the Super Sega team have some information, have some knowledge that allows them to at least get a quasi close to actually creating something, but obviously it always falls apart into a scam at the end. But it's not like they're not at least trying to fundamentally put some image on the screen, whether it's Super Sega FPGA or the Cinemartin 8K. It really is the most confusing thing ever. Somebody behind the scenes is at least able to put together something that has like a 10% functionality to it. They're able to make a designed object, and they're able to put it in front of the camera to show it to you. Who is doing that and how is it being done? I have absolutely no idea, but I do have some thoughts for sure.
Nice fucking model!
Just had to sneak that in one more time. Big thanks to Andy D for making that for me, because my rotoscoping and overall motion pathing as an editor is a 0 out of 10. I basically just do narrative and commercial stuff. But honestly, this is not surprising that this is maybe going to become an emulation box now. The website still says the most powerful FPGA device to play all Sega games and cartridges, and we knew from the start that really wasn't going to happen. The most powerful Sega FPGA gaming device right now is MiSTer FPGA, and will remain so for the very long time into the future, until somebody else comes around. And honestly, while I understand people want cartridge and CD reading on MiSTer FPGA, it just isn't a thing that is going to happen. So I understand there is a market for a device like this. Somebody wants to put in a Sega Saturn CD and have it run on an FPGA core. Somebody wants to plug in Master System games, Sega Genesis games, 32X games, and have them run on FPGA cores. That is why Analogue sells a metric crap ton of units, and will continue to do so when they make consoles. People want to put the real media into the FPGA device, and that is something that MiSTer FPGA is basically never going to provide, but neither are the Super Sega FPGA team. At best, you're going to be shipped an off-the-shelf emulation board with probably bad emulation, and at worst, your money is just going to completely disappear if you are one of the few people that have given them money. But I don't even know how many people have actually pre-ordered this thing. Alejandro says around 300, but I've only talked to 3 people that didn't order it for a video, and they said they pre-ordered it and had all their money taken from them. I was going to order this thing, but honestly, after like the third video even, I realized I was just throwing money away and I could have as much fun in video form without actually ever having to open up my wallet, because I knew full well what was going on here. But I do still hope that the Super Sega team takes me up on my offer if this thing falls apart. If the project is cancelled, Alejandro, I will give you $1,000 for one of the prototypes seen in these videos. You just have to send the whole thing and I'll pay you after it gets here. Do I expect that to actually be an offer that is accepted? 100% I do not, but it is one that I genuinely hope does get accepted, because I would love to take the thing apart on camera. But that's the most current update of the Todd Rogers of Spain, the video game Trap House, the Gaudi Gaudi, and every other nickname I've given him, including the Spanish Ron Jeremy. It just keeps getting weirder, but now we have two forks in the road. The question is it going to actually be a software emulation box, or is it going to be cancelled? But just keep your wallets in your pockets, don't wander into any video game trap houses this week, and you should be fine. But I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.